So when you guys take the AP exam in May, less than a month now, you are going to have 2 sections to the test. The first section is going to be multiple choice, which is going to account for 50% of your grade. The other section, of course, is the free response, which is the other 50% of your grade. Now, when you take the free response section, we just did the multiple choice the other day. It looks just like that, okay, where you have some multiple response at the end, but otherwise it's just standard multiple choice. But the free response, there are going to be 5 questions, and they're going to be of these types. It will always look like this. It has since they rewrote the test, I think in 2015. So you're going to have 1 question on experimental design. You're going to have 1 question that is a qualitative-quantitative translation, which just is a fancy way of saying a derivation. You're going to have 1 question that is a short answer paragraph argument, like the one you just did. That was a paragraph response. And then you're going to have 2 other short answer questions that aren't necessarily paragraphs. And you've seen some of those throughout the year as well. Okay, so that is what the free response section looks like. Now, in terms of scoring this test, okay, this is the way that they score it. They're going to take the number of questions you got correct out of the 50 multiple choice. They're going to multiply it by 0.8 and give you some value. Then they're going to score your free response. And those free response questions are out of 7 or out of 12 points, depending on the question. The one that you just did, it says on there is out of 7 points. So this would have been a 7-point question. But they're going to take those numbers that you get out of 7 or out of 12, and they're going to multiply them by that multiplier, 0.8888, get values, and then they're going to add everything together to get this sum, okay, at the end. So you're going to have the weighted score from section 1, your weighted score from section 2, and your composite score, which they will then round. And then that's how they determine your AP score, depending on where it falls in this range. Okay, so again, you can see out of 80, it does not add up to 100. Out of 80 points, if you get between a 61 and an 80, you have a 5. Okay, and then so on and so forth. That is pretty much what it looks like, how they're going to score it. So just so you're aware of what they're doing. Now, we're going to score ours today, which would, of course, just be a portion of that overall score. So that's what we're going to do right now is take a look at your paragraph FRQ and see how you guys did. So again, you should have somebody else's paper in front of you that you can write on, and you will write on it with that red pen that you have in order to score their responses. So for part A, this is the correct answer. You will notice it is worth 0 points. Okay, you don't get any points for getting the ranking right. Your points entirely come from the paragraph response underneath, which we'll look at in a second. But hopefully you got this right. That's probably a good sign for your paragraph response. But your correct answer for your ranking, and by the way, your question was to rank the 3 angles, theta sub embed, theta sub pass, and theta sub bounce from greatest to least in the space indicated below. Use a 1 for the greatest angle, 2 for next greatest, and so on. Okay, and so the correct ranking was that your greatest angle that you put a 1 was theta sub bounce, then theta sub embed, and then theta sub pass. So hopefully you got the ranking right. But if you didn't, you can still get some points on the paragraph response depending on how you answered it. So let's take a look at the points and how those are distributed. Okay, there are a total of 7 points for part B. This is just the first 2. Okay, I'm going to show some more in a second. You're going to score these as we go. So you or your neighbor got 1 point for using conservation of momentum. Note, this point is earned for an indication of how momentum conservation applies to the situation. If all they did was write the words conservation of momentum, that will not be sufficient. It needs to specifically apply to the situation you're looking at. But if they did that, they got a point, even if they didn't rank it right. Okay. The second point is for correctly stating or implying that in all 3 cases, the magnitude of the change in the horizontal momentum of the arrow during the collision equals the magnitude of the momentum gained by the pumpkin. If you did that statement, you already earned the first point, because that is, of course, referring to conservation of momentum. Okay, you don't have to state it by name. It would be implied, okay, if you did that. You used it. Okay, so that's the first 2 points. So if you haven't yet done so, please read through the response on the paper in front of you. and see if they get those points. If you find those points in their paragraph response, just put a check mark next to where they wrote it so you can keep track of how many points they have, because this is just the first 2. Okay, so take a moment and see if they got these 2 points. I'm going to give you a minute to look at their paper and see if they got these 2 points, and then we'll talk about the next points that are available to them. Okay, so it looks like we're all good with these 2. Let's take a look at the next 3 points. Again, there's a total of 7, so this is the next 3. This adds up to 5. We have 2 left after this. But the third point is earned for a valid argument explaining why the bounce arrow must transfer the most momentum. Okay, so if they have a valid argument that explains why the bounce arrow transfers the most momentum, they get a point. They get the next point for stating that the pass arrow ends up faster than the embedded arrow, or they could say that it does not transfer as much momentum to the pumpkin immediately after the collision. Again, that is a point if they did one or the other. There is an or in there. It's just one or the other. They did both, cool, but they have to have at least one. They get another point. This is the 5th point for indicating, regardless of their conclusion about whether the pass or embed arrow ends up going faster after the collision. So even if they got the conclusion wrong, it doesn't matter. They get a point for indicating that the arrow that slowed more during the collision transfers more momentum to the pumpkin. Okay, so they get a point for that, regardless of whether their ranking is right. Again, take a moment to look and see how many points your paper earned from these 3 that are on my screen. So I'll give you a moment to look at it again, and again, you can add check marks out to the side or wherever you see those statements, if you see those statements, and then we'll take a look at the last 2 points. All right, guys, just let's take a look at the last 2 points, and I do want to address something that was just mentioned as well. But the last 2 points, let's take a look. You get the 6th point for an explicit or implicit, so they can imply it, correct justification in terms of energy conservation, that the angle reached by the pumpkin is related to the speed of the pumpkin just after the collision. If they don't mention energy conservation, they are not going to get that point. You can't just tell me that it's faster so it goes higher. You need to explain that because it's faster here, that means it has more kinetic energy, which means it's going to have more gravitational potential energy, or it can do more work, however you want to phrase that, depending on how you define your system. Okay, but that's how they get that point. So 1 point for that. The last point, the 7th point, is for a logical, relevant, and internally consistent response that addresses the required argument or question asked and follows the guidelines described in the published requirements for a paragraph length response. This is always one of the points in a paragraph response. It has to be a paragraph. Okay? If you wrote bullet points, you're not going to get this point. Okay? If you did not write a paragraph, you're not going to get this point. Somebody mentioned that they had math. If the math is not in your paragraph, it's not going to get you this point. Okay? Now, if you have math on your paper and you put it in the paragraph, you're good. If you have math on your paper and you refer to it in your paragraph, you're good. Okay? But if you just have math randomly out to the side and you don't refer to it specifically, they're not going to count that as part of your response. Okay, so please make sure that you include it in your response. Yes?
What if you wrote 3 paragraphs?
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, I will say this. Guys, sometimes y'all do write too much. Okay, you can write yourself out of a point, because one way to lose this point is if it is not internally consistent. If you write so much that you start contradicting yourself somewhere, you're going to lose that point. Okay, so less is more. You don't have time to write, quite frankly, 3 paragraphs. You're not going to have time on the real test to do that. Okay, so use your time wisely. Write as little as possible to still fully address the question. You want to be concise. Save that time. Okay, so again, it says on here on the paper, in a clear, coherent paragraph length response that may also contain figures and or equations justify your ranking. Guys, it has to be a paragraph. That's what that last point is for. Okay, so, for example, this would earn full credit. If you wrote more than that, you probably didn't need to. If you put math in there, that's okay. I probably would have to. Okay, but this says the bounce arrow is the only one that reverses direction. So it has momentum to the left after the collision. By conservation of momentum, the pumpkin must then have a greater momentum to the right than the arrow had before the collision. After the embedded arrow hits, the arrow and pumpkin together have the same momentum as the arrow did just before the collision. The pass arrow still has some momentum to the right after hitting the pumpkin, so by conservation of momentum, the pumpkin has less momentum to the right than the arrow did before the collision. By conservation of energy, the maximum angle that the pumpkin reaches depends on the speed of the pumpkin. Higher speed means higher angle. So the bounce arrow pumpkin has the highest angle, and the pass arrow pumpkin has the lowest angle. That response would earn full credit. Did you have to write it exactly like that? Of course not. Okay, but that has all the points in there, and it's pretty concise. Okay, so again, you don't have to write 3 paragraphs. Okay, try to shorten that down and try to practice writing a little less so that you save yourself some time as well. One other thing I want to mention, and it does say this on here, it says at the bottom, do not write outside the box. Now I'm aware on this one that there was not nearly enough space down here, so it's a little different. However, for the actual AP test, if you write outside the box, it will not be scored. Okay, it needs to all fit inside the box. And the reason isn't because they're trying to be mean to you, it's because they're not scoring your actual paper, they are scanning these. And when they scan it, this part doesn't get scanned. Okay, so everything that you write needs to be inside of the box. Now, because I am very strongly encouraging you to write in pen, if you do make a mistake with the pen, somebody asked me this when they were scoring on the last FRQ test. They said, this person drew an arrow that says flip these 2 answers. You can do that. If you're answering a question and the question says, describe the energy of the ball earth system, and then the next one says, describe the energy of just the ball system, and you realize afterward, you're like, oh wait, I did that wrong. Draw an arrow that says that they need to switch places. That's fine. They will do that. If you write something and you're like, oh wait, that's wrong, put an X through it. It doesn't have to be made illegible. You don't have to scribble through it so that they can't read it at all. Just put an X through it. Okay, and then they won't score that part. If you realize afterward, oh wait, I think that was actually right and I don't want to write it again, circle it and write score this. Okay, they will score it if you do that. Okay, so you don't have to rewrite everything. Save yourself the time. If you run out of space entirely because you've been changing your mind too many times and you've X'd things out and whatever else, and you have space somewhere else on your test, write that answer on a different page and then put my answer is on page 7. They will score that. Okay, now on page 7 you can put answer to number 3, whatever. Okay, so again, you can do those types of things when you're taking the actual AP test, and I would recommend doing that as opposed to trying to rewrite things just for the sake of time. Okay, if you have that space, yes sir.
Could you first write in pencil?
I would not recommend doing that. It would probably make it hard to read whenever they scanned it.
And also take a long time.
It would take longer too. I would not recommend that. And I don't recommend pencil just because of the whole shipping process and the scanning process. And we don't know if it's still going to be there or if it's going to be smudged. We don't know if it's going to scan. So I would recommend pen.
I don't even think they allow you to do pencil, correct?
I would not. It says on here to use a pencil or a pen with blue or black ink, but I don't know. Whenever we get supplies handed out, I'm pretty sure you only get a pen because of the issues that have happened with pencils.
Issues.
With them not being scored. All right. Any other questions? By the way, guys, the answer to this question, if you're wondering, other than this one explanation, if you want to hear it explained, there will be a video posted to Schoology and to My Open Math after school today that you can go take a look at in order to tell whether or not, or if you don't understand how we got the ranking, because this is pretty concise. It doesn't show any of the math. So if you want it in terms of the math or anything like that, I have posted some videos that I found on YouTube because somebody recorded it and put it out there. So those will be made available to you, and you're welcome to open it up whenever you get home. It'll be in My Open Math, and it will be in Schoology. So anyway, that's it for today. If you have one of my red pens, please bring it back up to the front. I do need the papers back, so I'm going to come around and take your FRQs.